Today, we're going to talk about being a polyglot, learning languages, multiple languages, and also how being a polyglot can teach you to become a better teacher yourself. And today, I'm going to talk about that with a friend named Adrian. He runs what's called Accent Amazing. I found him on Instagram a few years ago when I was looking for other accent coaches, and he's so knowledgeable. You guys are going to learn so much today through his passion of learning and teaching through languages and how sounds really help us to create inroads, and how the more aware we become of sounds, the easier it is to pick up languages and to sound better in those languages. There's so many tips and so many tricks that I want you to hear today. I hope you really enjoy today's episode. I'm Bianca, your personal American accent coach, and I'm here to help you master an American accent in English because your voice is your choice when it comes to how you sound. I try to release a podcast episode every 2 weeks. And so you should really subscribe to whatever podcast platform you use so that you don't miss the newest episode. And by the way, if you want to see the full video of the episode, it's available at Accent Coach Bianca on YouTube. Now, let's get on with the show. Hey, Adrian, it's so nice to see you. Welcome again. I haven't seen you in a long time. We used to do some Instagram lives, and this is the first time you've been on the podcast. I'm interested to have you today because you're one of the few polyglots that I know, and I know that you have participated and you've given some talks and workshops at the Polyglot Gathering, which is exciting. And today we want to talk about how that helps you learn things and teach things as well, because you're also an accent coach. Can you tell us more about yourself first?
Sure. My name is Adrian. I am an accent coach. I specialize in the American accent or various types of American accents, but usually I teach one type to most of my students. And then I help high-level learners of English sound less foreign and more native. I studied linguistics in university, naturally, because I love languages and I like understanding their structures and how they're different, not just learn to speak it, which of course I like to do, but actually understanding the phonology and phonetics. For example, I studied Korean by myself before university because I was really interested in like how the sounds changed. So the phonology, even though at that time I didn't know it was called phonology, right? Because it was before university. I'm originally from Hong Kong. I grew up there, but my dad is from the US. And my mom, she's from Hong Kong, but she also lived in the US and in Canada as well. So I grew up speaking mostly English, but there were four languages spoken in the household. So there was English mostly, everyone spoke English. And then my dad spoke Mandarin at some degree, but his native tongue is English. My mom speaks Cantonese and Shanghainese. And then my grandparents also spoke Shanghainese. So that's English, Mandarin, Cantonese, and Shanghainese. So I spoke some degree of those ones. And I was always interested in those, like the differences, because they're systematically different, which is something we can talk about later in the podcast. That's my
Hmm.
background.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, I think a lot of people who are interested in languages, it comes from something when they were young too. I remember when I was a kid, I was fascinated when I went to a garage sale. I don't know if you're old enough to remember garage sales or yard sales, but I would go and people used to learn with physical flashcards, right? And they would be written on index cards or paper, and sometimes they were more professional, but I was just in love with language flashcards, and I would find them at garage sales and yard sales for nothing, right? Because people would often buy them and never learn the language. So I would pick them up for a quarter, and I just loved looking at them because I loved how, to me, it was like a font, right? Oh, this is a font of how somebody thinks and speaks. And I was really enamored with that. And when I went to university, I also studied linguistics, but more through the lens of anthropology. And meaning I took a bunch of anthropology courses, and then linguistics was later, and I fell in love with French phonetics. So I think we have that background as well. Even though in my house, where I grew up, only English was spoken, even though my father's side of the family spoke Greek, and my mother's side of the family, they spoke some French and German, but in the house, we didn't really speak it. I feel like we have similar childhoods in that. Tell us more about being a polyglot and what that means, because I know it's a pretty common term, but people might not know to what extent it means. If I speak two languages, am I a polyglot? If I picked up some Spanish because I watch a lot of telenovelas, am I considered a polyglot? What does it mean to be a polyglot? Can we start with that?
Yeah, I think the definition is just someone who speaks many languages, and that's basically the definition. So that might it's kind of a little bit vague. Some people might consider many languages to be three or more, maybe even two or more. Maybe some people are like, oh, it's only if it's five or more. And then I don't think it's that clearly defined, but it just means poly means many and then glot
Mhm.
means speaking, so you speak multiple languages. Yeah. I actually don't even call myself a polyglot, but people call me that, and I'll accept that terminology. I don't think I speak any language fluently except for English. Like all my other languages, I'm working on and I'd like to improve. But yeah, that's how I see the term polyglot, and I'm happy to accept it, but I don't usually call myself that.
I've heard
Yeah.
that same thing a few times, and I find that very interesting because let's say I speak French, and I'm like, yeah, I speak French. And you learn a language in school, or you learn a language on your own, or you learn through Netflix or whatever. And there's a certain level at which you need to feel like, yes, I can do this language, right? Maybe at the beginning it's very receptive, right? And then later you're starting to speak it either by yourself alone in your room or with some other people. But you, at some point, you yourself have decided, yes, I speak this language, right? And then I feel like there's sometimes an imposter syndrome thing there where you say, oh, I don't really speak X language. I took some Russian in school. I took a little bit of German, but those don't go on my list, right? Unless somebody asks and they're digging deeper. I think it's interesting that you bring that up because I wonder when you go to these polyglot gatherings or other polyglot happenings, let's say, what when people decide to go there, they have already accepted the fact that they label themselves as a polyglot, right? At some point, you accept that and you wear it proudly, yeah?
Oh, I'm not sure. I think most do, but the Polyglot gathering, the largest gathering of language lovers and educators and other people who do language related stuff in the world, that it just says you need to speak only one language to communicate. But
Oh,
if you like languages, but I think
hmm.
everyone who I met there, I would call a polyglot, even if they wouldn't call a polyglot. It's yeah, I think it's the same with me. They might not call themselves a polyglot, but other people would consider it. I always qualify what languages I speak to what degree. People always
Mm,
ask, "Oh, how many languages do you speak?" And I'm like,
mm-hmm,
speaking a language. And then they're
mm-hmm.
like, "Oh, you can have a conversation." And I'm like, what level of conversation?" Because I usually do that in a teasing way because I know what they're trying
Yeah,
to
yeah,
get
yeah.
at. But like
Mm-hmm,
I after I ask maybe one like some qualifying questions like that, I'm like, okay, I would say that I can have an interesting conversation comfortably
mm-hmm,
about things that are beyond the just introductions and like travel and survival stuff. I could have interesting conversations about more complex topics and what's going on in the news in about 7 or 8 languages. But I don't think I'm fluent. I'm not fluent in those
mm,
languages in
mm-hmm,
English,
mm-hmm,
right? But then I would say in this order from best to worst that I'm comfortable in, it's English and then Mandarin, Cantonese, Spanish, French. And then Portuguese, I'm not quite sure. It's like Portuguese, I'm taking
mm-hmm,
those sounds from like words from Spanish and changing it a little bit to Portuguese.
mm-hmm,
And then I lived in Brazil like recently, earlier this year for a month and a half, and I was just speaking
mm-hmm,
Portuguese all the time, or at
mm-hmm.
least what I think was Portuguese, and I had no problems. I'd say that, but I do definitely use some Spanish words, and then
Yeah.
Polish, Russian, and those are the ones I'm comfortable in. And then
Mm-hmm.
I can also have more basic but travel sort of stuff and some basic conversation in like Croatian, Korean, and Japanese. I was speaking Korean and Japanese when I was in Korea and Japan to get around, but I don't think I would be comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I would say my polyglottery is.
Nice. I love that word, my polyglottery. Awesome. And yeah, I love how because everybody is different. They all feel comfortable at certain levels. Like I might be comfortable
Yeah.
in a Spanish conversation at B1, but you might not be comfortable at B2. And even when you use that framework, when you say A1, A2, a lot of people might not know that unless they're already into languages. So you have to find a way to describe it so that they can understand it. And they're probably just looking to see how many languages you're into or what you're into,
Yeah.
because I imagine they're always surprised. Like maybe you're sitting at a cafe and you overhear a little bit of Korean behind you. And so then you just go up to that person and you say something and it probably just blows their eyeballs open.
Oh
No?
yeah, that's happened. I went to a language exchange. I often go to language exchanges because I love them. But it wasn't actually a language exchange nominally, but everyone was just practicing English. But then this was in Gothenburg last month, no, the month before. And I met one guy who was from Croatia, and now I started speaking Croatian to him, and he was like really surprised. And then he was talking to me a lot. He became really like energized, and we had a cool conversation in Croatian. Yeah, it's always fun because people are always surprised when I know something from their languages. For example, when I was at the party a couple of years ago in Hungary, in Budapest, and I sat down at a table that seemed to be empty, but then these people came by and they looked Central Asian-ish.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't quite sure. They looked could be Central Asian or East Asian. They looked really like not happy. They were like
Mm.
frowning and stuff. I was like, "Oh, is it okay if I sit here?" He's like, and then they were like, "Yeah, fine." And then I heard them speak Russian, and I was like, "Excuse me, are you from Kazakhstan?" And then they suddenly, and then they were really surprised and, "Oh, yeah, how do you know about Kazakhstan?" And I started speaking. I said a few Kazakh words. I
Hmm.
only know Kazakh words, and then I spoke some Russian to them, and they were super friendly. But it opens doors, and people are surprised when you know about their country or their language, and that you can communicate in their language. It like surprises them, and they get really excited about it.
Oh, totally. Yeah, totally. Like you and I, we speak English as a first language, so it's maybe not as, it doesn't hit us as hard as if we spoke a language that had a smaller number of speakers, right? And if we finally encountered somebody randomly like that, oh my God, I would be in love with that person. Yeah, totally. And not just, for example, not just Russian's also a very large language, large
Yeah,
group. And then you're like, more specifically though, oh, Kazakh. Like, who's gonna know that? It makes people feel so seen, so
yeah,
heard, literally, and so welcome, I'm sure, when this happens. So it's a way like, yeah, you're bridging, you're making bridges, you're opening doors, but also it's that connection that I
yeah.
think language is all about. And so it just really warms my heart to hear that too. Yeah, you mentioned Kazakh. What was it about the Mongolian one too? I think you said something about
Oh,
Mongolian.
and say it, but yet. But
Yeah.
sometimes I meet Mongolians and I know a few words from Mongolian because in high school we had a school trip to Mongolia, and
Hmm.
that's actually the first time I learned, like I was preparing for that because I've always been interested in other cultures and other countries, and like Mongolia was so different, so I wanted to prepare. So I picked up a Mongolian book and I started learning how to pronounce the things. Like it was the Cyrillic alphabet. It's actually that's where I learned the Cyrillic alphabet. It wasn't for Russian.
Ah.
I
Mm.
learned Mongolian, and I still remember a bunch of phrases in Mongolian. And whenever I meet a Mongolian, I can do some introductory things like, "Oh, my name is. How are you?" And my name is Adrian. Meniner Adrian. And then, "What is your name?" Taniner Khen. Get really surprised. One of the Kazakhs that I met at that party, like we're friends still. And like a year later, when I visited Prague, where he is based, he was like, "Hey, I'll show you around." So he showed me around, he drove me around, and like his English is not good. His English is really
Mhm.
bad. So we spoke only in Russian. So
Mhm.
that was good. We're still friends like a couple of years later. Yeah. So if he visits, I'm gonna show
Awesome.
him around as well.
That's exciting. That's super exciting. And it's funny that you touched on that subject because a lot of people, we said connection is really important for a purpose, a motivation behind language, but also like friendships. You connect with
Yeah.
people and you stay friends with them for a very long time. So it's like when you have a shared interest, whatever that is, baking bread, making Legos together, whatever it is, if you can find people who speak a different language but have the same passion as you, in this case, the passion is languages, then I feel like you've got lifelong friends there too. So
Yeah,
I
for
think that's
sure.
why community, yeah, community is really important there. And I heard you mention that like Polish and Croatian and things like that. And would you say that, I'm just guessing from your Instagram posts and things like that, would you say that Slavic languages would be your favorite?
Oh yeah, I was thinking of niching towards Slavic languages just because I really Slavic languages. They're so interesting. They're quite different from English, like grammatically and sound wise, like structurally. And also, I'm often in Slavic countries or countries where they speak Slavic languages. I'm currently in Latvia. They speak Latvian, but they also speak Russian a lot here. I think 25% of the population is ethnic Russian, but Latvian and Lithuanian are actually Baltic languages, which are part of the Balto-Slavic group. So there's a lot of
Mhm.
similarities as well, which is cool. But yeah, no, I really like Slavic languages. Polish is my best. I actually one time, due to a social media trend, I was challenged to write a short rap song in it, and I did.
That
So
is
yeah.
fantastic. Maybe we could link to that because that sounds
Oh,
super,
I'm
super
not
interesting.
sure. I'm not sure about that. I'll have to think about that. It's not,
Yeah, we'll say
it was fun,
maybe.
but yeah, yeah, maybe. I like
Mhm.
Slavic language a lot. And once you
Mm.
learn one, the next one becomes so much easier because they're so similar because they were like the same language until I think 1,000 years ago, but I'm not 100% sure. But I think they branched off very recently, so they have a lot of similarities. So it my first Slavic language was Russian, and it took me a
Mhm.
year and a half of study, like self-study and some private classes to be comfortable making, I don't know, like maybe even A2 sentences or maybe low B1 sentences. It took me a year and a half. And then I studied Polish, and it took me 3 months to get to a point where when I took the placement test for a course that I was going to take when I was based in Poland for a while, they told me that I could take either the A2 classes or B1 classes. And it only took me 3 months. And
Mm.
sometime just after COVID or just towards the end of COVID, when I was starting to actually do this digital nomad thing, and my first stop was Croatia, I started to take some Croatian classes on italki. And it took me 2 hours to form basic sentence, be comfortable making basic sentences. Like it's so similar. Yeah. And now I can just read a lot of Slavic languages. I just look at it and I understand a lot of things without even
Hmm.
studying it.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just gonna say it's a kind of a domino effect. I guess it builds off of each other. And there's gotta be a phrase about this, like less is more, but it's not some kind of maxim about that, is
They have
that
like the same kind of fundamentals, like a lot of the
uh-huh.
what they share a lot of commonalities. And we'll probably talk about this in a moment as well as one of the topics. As you learn more languages, you start to see the similarities. And that's one of the things I try to use to teach my students, because there's a lot of similarities that I can have. Like students already know how to do these things that exist in English. They just don't know that it also exists in their own language. If you can draw
Hmm.
on those like commonalities, then it becomes a lot easier. And yeah, most
Exactly.
languages have a lot of similarities, so you can just
Hmm.
use that to your
Yeah,
advantage.
absolutely. And I feel like for in both of our cases, if you are a person who's teaching anything, having been on the other side of that gives you all the perspective and lots of extra little tricks to show somebody else, because maybe somebody is coming to us to learn something, but they haven't really examined how they do it in their first language. But if you or I have seen how they do it in their first language, then we can make those connections that they might not do it. Because I feel like there's some very obvious similarities. If you're a learner, there's something that's going to be obvious to you, and it's probably obvious to most people, right? Something pretty glaringly obvious. But each of us, too, makes those connections in our own brain and sees the patterns that we also see that other people might not see just because of our experience and things like that. Or we're making associations based on our own memories and experiences as well that somebody else might not share at all. So I think being on the learning side, the more you can make those neural connections, the better and quicker and faster your learning is going to be, and the deeper it's going to be. So that means it's going to stick more. So that's what I think. I think we both probably agree on there. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
for sure. Yeah, we both
Mm.
speak Spanish. You can see one example is that you got English words ending in ity, right? Like
Hmm.
fraternity or like liberty, and then it becomes igualdad in Spanish, like
Hmm.
igualdad, fraternidad. I think that's a word probably.
Yeah.
Um, so then, and then in French, it's université, fraternité, fraternité.
Uh-huh.
Italian, it's probably ita. I don't speak it, but I think it's like universi, like
Hmm.
nationalità, probably like that.
Hmm.
It's shared base, and it's systematically different.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that, yeah,
There's parallels there. And especially if you look at, depending on the group of languages, like you were just mentioning, like French and Spanish and Italian, these Romance languages, which I'm sure that's also true in the Slavic languages, where you're like, oh, look at this, it kind of transfers, just switch this out. And you can see those parallels as well. And then there's other things too that we can call cognates, or sometimes even false cognates in other languages too, that
yeah,
can help us or they can trick us too. So I'm sure you've had
yeah.
that experience.
Yeah, there's one, I always talk about this with my friends. But for example, in Russian, there's a word zapomnit, and in Polish, you have zapomnieć. In Russian, it's composed of two Slavic, what's it called? Morphemes, yeah. So two Slavic morphemes. Pomni is like something to do with the mind, memory.
Hmm.
And then za is a prefix, and there's a lot of prefixes in Slavic languages, but za can either mean into or behind. And so in Russian, zapomnit is to memorize, maybe not memorize, to
Mm.
remember, right?
Hmm.
But in Polish, it's to forget. And the reason for this is because the base root is the pomni, which means memory. But then in Russian, it seems like they've taken za to mean into. So
Hmm.
it's put it into your memory. And in Polish, they've taken za to mean behind. So it's out of your memory. So yeah, zapomnieć is to forget, and zapomnieć in Russian is to remember.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's hilarious. Those are the ones you find
Oh,
out the hard ways, the
yeah.
false cognates.
Well, no,
Uh-huh.
not quite. There's another one that's even funnier, which is in Russian and Polish, you get like the word trudna, which
Hmm.
means difficult. And then in Croatian, you have trudna as well, but it means pregnant. And so
Mm.
there were a few times when I said, "Oh, the language is so pregnant."
I've done that in Spanish. You probably know. You
Right.
think, oh, I'm so embarrassed because my Spanish is so bad. Not only am I saying I'm embarrassed, but I'm not even saying that. I'm saying I'm
Yeah.
pregnant as well. So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. True does mean it means pregnant. And then to say difficult, you say teżko. And teżko, it's a cognate to a Polish ciężko. But because of a series of sound changes, it doesn't quite sound the same, but like Polish phonology, you know that tia, things that were like tia became
Mm-hmm.
cia. Polish still retains the nasal sounds like so it's like
Mm.
ciężko, but then the
Mm-hmm.
other Slavic languages have lost it. So teżko and ciężko are related. They both mean heavy or difficult. So teżko means difficult in Croatian and ciężko means heavy in Polish. But it's
Mm-hmm.
also related to which there's a vowel mutation. So it's not cięży, but wciąży, which means pregnant in Polish. So it is related. Words here and there.
You can see the path. You can go from A to Q at least through all these things, enough of
Exactly.
those things. Yeah, I think that's really cool because then you can get this top-down view of things and you can see how
Yeah.
they've changed and morphed. And I think that gives you a lot of insight for things. And it's probably makes you very good at guessing things that you don't know
Yeah.
about as well.
Yeah, sure. Another example is with time ago before university, I was interested in Korean because of the complex sound changes, lots of constant mutations and just phonological things happening. But that also made it easy to guess the Korean word based on the Cantonese pronunciation because a lot of the Korean words come from Middle Chinese, which is closer to Cantonese. Cantonese has and Korean have both maintained the like more complex syllable structures. And when I used to speak Korean better, I would, if I didn't know a word, I would just take the word in Cantonese and change it a bit. For example, in Korean, the words for one, two, three, four, five till 10 is the words one. It's okay. It's like it is. And so one thing you might notice is that the things in Cantonese that have a T at the end of the syllable, like yeah, tat and bat are correlated with the Korean words that have like an L or an R at the end of the syllable. So ir is, and then you get chir is tat, and you get
Mm-hmm.
par is bat. And so the T is, if you have a word in Cantonese that ends in a T, then it ends in an L or R in Korean,
Mm-hmm.
similar to which is thing, and then which is pronunciation is fat yum.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's super interesting. What I was going to ask too is if for you, as on the learning side, if there's any difference in your process between a language that has an alphabet where you can see the sounds versus an alphabet where you have almost like pictures. I'm describing this for people who don't know the technical names, but would you say, even if it's not in, let's say, in the Roman alphabet, where we already know those sounds more or less, even if they're different, let's say, like you said, the Cyrillic alphabet. What
yeah.
about languages like Korean versus Cantonese? How is that different for you in your process as a learner, as a polyglot?
I actually haven't learned that many languages that don't have some sort of alphabetic system. Cantonese, like the Chinese languages, have a logographic system, like you said,
Mhm.
the like pictures, but they're not completely abstract. Like sometimes you see parts and you can guess that the sound would be similar to this, but or yeah, similar to this sound or that sound based on other words that also they all have this similar sounds. But maybe Japanese, you could say that Japanese is like that, but I would just change it into, I would romanize it, like make it
Hmm.
Roman letters and just based on that. Korean is actually an alphabet. That's fairly easy to look at it.
Yeah. True, good point.
There's a
Yeah, I
lot of
was
sound.
thinking for you, it sounds like everything comes back. It sounds like everything comes back to the sound, right?
Oh
And the way
yes.
that you process things is more about like how does something sound and how are these sounds related to other things? And that's how it sounds like it goes through that language in your head. That seems how it comes out.
For example, I was actually just teaching this earlier to a student where we were talking about how we were talking about aspirated sounds in English, like how they're not aspirated when you have an S sound before it, it blocks aspiration. So even if you would say, for example, the word expect, it doesn't
Hmm.
have an S letter in there, but it has
Yeah.
an S sound. So expect, and you can't say
Hmm.
ex. No one says we don't speak, we speak,
Hmm.
right? Because the S sound blocks the aspiration. It doesn't matter if you spell it that way. Letters are not, I always tell my students this, but letters aren't, they don't exist in reality. They're not real. We've made them up. The mouth doesn't know what letters are. Like if you write Serbian, you can write Serbian in Cyrillic or in Latin, and it's still the same language. You can have
Hmm.
a language without any alphabet, and it's still a
Hmm.
language. It's the mouth and the way the mouth interacts with sounds. It's only based on sounds. It doesn't know spelling.
And especially in English when it's a really
Yeah.
poor grasp at trying to handle that problem. Yeah, yeah. If we just think of it as sounds, then that's going to be pretty helpful anyways. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. So on the other side then, so you're on one side of learning and putting it together and seeing the patterns and you use sound a lot for that. What about teaching then? So you touched on that. Tell us more about how being a polyglot helps you to teach languages. And specifically, let's talk about accents as well, since we're talking about sounds.
So yeah, I like to use, I think there are two things here. I like to use examples of sounds that exist in the student's native tongue and also how English speakers sound, their accents, English language accents in the native speaker's native tongue. So for example, a lot of times when I teach Spanish speaking students or actually Romance language speaking students, like French speakers, Spanish speakers, Portuguese speakers, aspiration, I tell them to think about how an English speaker sounds when they say things like, instead of saying taco, we would probably say taco, yo quiero un taco. It sounds, and they're like, oh yeah, it sounds so strange. And I'm like, yeah, that's because that's the sound in English. No English word can start with bata and ka. It's always going to be pata and ka. So we say como te llamas, right? Instead of
Mhm.
como te llamas. And so I'd use that. How I use examples that exist in their native tongue. With Russian, I have to teach them how to pronounce the ah sound. That's a tough sound, but also super important in English. You can't
Mm,
a lot of words with ah, right? It's super
mm,
important. It's kind of hard to do. But what I teach Russian speakers is to use an existing, like an allophone, like a version of that sound in words that exist in Russian. So it does exist in words like five, which is in Russian bet, bet.
mhm,
And if you, this sound, the ya sound or the ah sound changes into ah if you have a soft sound in the front and a soft sound in the back, in like before and after it. So the phonologically, underlyingly, you would the word pet is actually a p and a t, but when you put it together, it's not p at, it's not piat, it's
mhm,
pet. Because soft
mm,
sounds are causing the ah, which is more central, to be forward. And then I asked them to say that and try to isolate that ah sound. And I also compare it to how it's different from when you have fifth, which is this is still ah because the first sound is pi, it's a soft sound. Then you get ah, but then the next sound is also a hard sound, so it no longer pushes the sound forward. So it's
mhm.
piati, which is normal ah for Russian, but you get that with an ah sound like the English sound. And I try to isolate those sounds and get them to be able to say it without having the other sounds next to it. It's a kind of a hard process, but it's a bit
Mm,
easy because their tongue is still doing it without me
mhm,
having to teach them how to move their tongue and their mouth stuff.
mhm.
They're already doing it. I'm just telling them how to, I'm trying to get them to elongate it and split it off, and then they can do.
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like when we know those little tiny things about somebody else's language that they didn't really think about cognitively because they just grew up speaking the language, if you can be like, here, look, you're already doing it, or look, you're super close, just pay attention. And then, like you said, raise your awareness,
Yeah.
isolate it. Once you can get somebody to do that skill, I feel like boom, like they can apply that skill to so many other sounds and so many other
Yeah.
things, and they can see that. But when you don't have that little golden nugget of information, then you have to figure out how to do it, and it takes you so much longer, which I think is the real benefit to going to people like us, right? People who have all this knowledge, who can just get right to the heart of something. Even if I've only just met you, I already know something enough about you to help you that much quicker. And I think that's why having an accent coach is really valuable. It's like I used to teach snowboarding and I used to be a skier quite a lot. And I used to teach the snowboarding. So people would come to me after they've plateaued and they didn't think they could get any better. But when you or I see something from the outside, we're like, oh, yeah, just fix this little thing. Boom, golden. And I think that is so important because we can see that from the outside. And the more, like we said earlier, the more we've experienced, the easier it gets for us to help other people too. So I think that's really interesting, especially with the patterns, the similarities, the differences. Like you were saying, I think what you're getting at is like knowing a sound that's either identical
Yeah.
or that's really similar. Do you have some other ones that you were gonna mention too?
Yeah, for example, with the Spanish speakers, sometimes I've done this a few times where, they are struggling with the sound the, but
Mhm.
then I tell them, take the word for finger, dedo, right? The first D is like a normal D, like a D-ish sound. And then the second one is not really dedo, it's like dedo. right? It's
Hmm.
sound. It gets, and that's the English of this sound. So they just need to isolate that to
Yeah.
say this and that instead of this and that. Yeah. So that's a common thing that happens in Spanish, the weakening of consonants between vowels, and they do that all the time. If you want to sound more native in Spanish, you got to do
Hmm.
that. Things like that. And if you don't,
Yeah.
you sound Brazilian though. The Brazilians don't say uma bebida, right? They don't say
Hmm.
bebida, they say bebida. So
Hmm.
these inter multilingual things, they're really helpful and teaching
Yeah.
like that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And knowing I think we really nailed it in terms of both sides, the learning side of anything and the teaching side, whether it's the whole language, whether it is the sounds of the language, right? I'm trying to work on my accent, my pronunciation, make it sound a little bit more like the audience that I want to talk with, right? It's all about the patterns and it's all about raising your awareness and really just paying attention and paying attention to what's my tongue doing or how are my lips, how tense are my lips, and what about the space in my mouth and things that I don't know, maybe you and I, because we were probably odd little children, but we thought about these things probably as kids. But most speakers, I don't think, thought about these things until somebody told them to. And I think that's, again, the benefit of having somebody like us come around and just say, hey, I think you're already doing it. Let's just pay a little more attention. There you go. You got it. Do it again. Or, that was a little bit off, right? But here's why it's off, and here's how you can fix it. And so, that being said, can you tell us how we, the audience, could work more with you, Adrian, and see if we're a good fit?
Sure. So currently, I mostly do one-on-one coaching. I teach on italki, but I'm also teaching off of italki. Currently in the works of building my own sort of platform thingy or using a different platform. But you can stay in touch on my website, accentamazing.com/start. There's a free mini email course, and you put your email in and you start getting stuff from me, the useful tips and like updates. You can follow me on all the socials. I'm Accent Amazing because I make your accent amazing. But yeah, no, you just look at my stuff there. I write blogs sometimes, I post sometimes, but I'm gonna work. I have some video courses as well. Yeah. So one-on-one coaching is my main thing, but I have some video courses and I'm currently in the works of just improving all of that.
Yeah, I think if you're a person like you, or a person, what I mean to say is a person who's really passionate about languages, you already know some things that you can apply, some tricks. Often, I think getting an accent in another language, the more you know, more is more in this case, the more you know, the more you can apply, the more you can pay attention, you can see these things yourself. But most people can maybe hear that there's something going on there, but they don't actually know what to do. And they definitely need to know if what they're producing is on point, right? So I think that there's a lot of videos out there, there's a lot of apps even for accents, but I think that the one-on-one is the thing that really propels people forward very quickly and to get those tricks themselves. And I'm a very firm believer in the fact that like that kind of thing that you get from a person, the gold nugget there is the feedback is the thing that, and for us, we make it very personalized. And so I think that's the best thing that somebody can do for themselves. And today, I think the takeaways today were more about your passion. I was really excited to hear about your passion and all the different examples that you were giving, as well as the idea of the sounds of relationships and the parallels that we can draw, among other things, too, to make things make more sense in our own heads, in our own process. And if for a person, it's not about the sounds. Maybe it's about the kinesthetic feeling. Maybe it's more about, maybe some people are more into the reading of the language, finding that thing that really focuses you on how you are able to go forward in your goals, I think is the most important, not for the most, sorry. I think that's the most important thing for someone to do to stoke that fire of passion in the language. Because I think most of the people we work with, they have some kind of passion. That's why they're there. They like it, they enjoy it. And to not become, what am I trying to say? To not become overwhelmed, to not become frustrated, we have to keep stoking that passion and figure out how we learn best so we can make progress. Also, what you said about isolating sounds, really important because it might exist there in some form or another. And also the using that, like we said earlier, to find the patterns that are most useful for me. I think those are the biggest takeaways from today, to think about learning multiple languages on both sides, on the learner side and then on the teaching side too. Is there anything you want to add to that?
No, I think that encapsulates most of it. Yeah. One thing that I might add is that it's very helpful to understand the structure, like the concepts in addition to actually being able to say the sound, I always tell my students it's not enough to know how to say the sound. You need to know where to say the sound, right? Because for
Mhm.
example, aspiration in English, it's not every single PTK is always aspirated. No,
Mm.
you need to know not only how to say the sound, but also where to say the sound.
Where
Just English.
where to apply it, you mean? You don't mean where in your mouth, where in the articulation. You mean where to
Well, I
apply
mean,
this sound.
yeah, like in the context of the word, like the
Uh-huh.
phonological context. Because for example, with Spanish, I'm I don't think that I might be wrong here, but like with for example, dedo, I don't think you say dedo. Like the first D is usually is a normal D, and then the
Mhm.
one afterwards becomes the. But
Mhm.
anyway, I know for English, for example, with that aspiration, like you never have pataka at the start of a word,
Mhm.
and then you never have pataka after an S sound in the word, right?
Mhm.
Like you might be able to say the sound perfectly, like to articulate the sound perfectly, but if you're putting it in the wrong context of the word, you won't sound native.
It's all about the variation and how I'm applying it in its maybe phonological environment, right? It could be beginning, middle, end of the word, what I'm connecting it with, what's around it. All of these things influence that. So it's not just about, let's say, one sound, one T sound. No, there's tons of variations. And to really be fluent, not just in English, but other places too, is to know how those sounds are affecting each other, basically, like what you mentioned with Russian too. So I think that's really interesting. I think that we got a lot out of today's talk, even though it was pretty short. I feel like we've all picked up tons of little tips. We picked up tons of little tips that are really, how should I say, they really hook me. I'm like, oh, I didn't know that about this Mandarin thing, or oh, I didn't know that about Kazakh. That's very interesting. So I hope that it sparks interest in our listeners as well today too, and they know how to get a hold of you. And we can always follow you on social media too and see where you're living. You're posting information, lots of very comprehensive things about phonetics too. That's something I always really enjoy seeing in your posts. And so I want to thank you so much for joining me today to talk about polyglottery, as we said earlier.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure. I love talking about this things. I can talk about it forever, honestly.
Yeah, me too. It's the same way with sounds in English, right? Yeah, people say, "Oh my God, you could talk about a stop T for hours," and it's yeah, because it's awesome. So I think we can probably schedule many more episodes together and maybe talk about the finer points of some of these sounds that may or may not exist in English and where people are coming from. I think that'll be a really interesting series. So we'll keep in touch about that. And in the meantime, we'll say thanks a lot, guys. Thanks for listening today.
Thank you.
Bye, see you soon. And thanks again, Adrian, for joining me today to talk about being a polyglot. And thank you guys today for listening all the way till the end. I want you to know that your passion is a strength that you have, and how you process things can help you find all the little tricks in there. And if you need any help with that, remember that every month I have a free masterclass on the last Thursday of the month, and we go over a specific topic every month, and it's always new. So I want you to sign up for that. And I want you to sign up for that because that's the best 2 hours you're going to spend every month on your accent, because your voice is your choice. If you found this episode helpful in any way, please subscribe and leave a review. It's actually really helpful to me. Now, before I go, I have 2 tasks for you to do. First, I want you to register and come to my free monthly masterclass. They're on the last Thursday of the month. In just 1 hour, you're going to master a specific American accent skill. For example, the TH sound or rhythm. The Zoom registration link actually changes each month. So the second and maybe more important thing I want to ask you to do is to sign up for my mailing list, because you're going to get the registration link each month, and you're going to get bonus materials before and after the masterclass that I only send to my email list subscribers. The email opt-in link is down in the show notes. Be sure to sign up for my mailing list and come to the monthly masterclass for free. I'm Bianca, your personal American accent coach, and I want you to know that your voice is your choice. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the show. I'll see you in the next episode. Bye for now.